We live in an era of instant connections, where approval manifests in the form of likes, shares, and followers. On the digital stage of social media, human interactions are transformed into validation metrics, and the pursuit of external approval becomes a routine. The simple act of posting a photo or an opinion is no longer an authentic expression, but an attempt to capture a fraction of attention, to feel seen. In this environment, every like functions as a symbolic token of recognition, fueling a subtle yet powerful illusion, the idea that our worth lies in the hands of others, mediated by screens and algorithms. The quest for digital validation shapes not only how we present ourselves, but also how we perceive ourselves. We begin to calibrate our emotions and self-esteem based on others' reactions. This cycle creates an internal disconnection, a distance between who we are and who we project ourselves to be. Deep down, each notification carries with it a promise, the promise of belonging, of being accepted, of being important. But the constant wait for this approval drags us into a vicious cycle of dissatisfaction and doubt. The psychological impact of this external surge is profound. As we stray from our own authenticity, we become prisoners of a fabricated reality, where external validation is a constant need and self-worth becomes a distant mirage. On social media, comparison becomes an almost unconscious habit. We scroll through screens observing carefully selected fragments of others' lives, portraits of moments that seem perfect, flawless smiles, grand achievements, dreamlike settings. Every post becomes a display of the ideal life, where the ordinary is eclipsed by the extraordinary. But behind these images lies a distortion. What is shown is not the complete reality, but an edited, filtered, and polished version. In this process, we find ourselves caught in a cycle of measuring our own worth against this illusory perfection. The pressure to conform to these unrealistic standards generates chronic dissatisfaction. What was once considered sufficient, our bodies, our achievements, our experiences, now seems disproportionately small compared to what we see online. It's as if each person's life is placed on a scale, where the other always seems happier, more successful, more fulfilled. Then, the fear of missing out arises. This anxiety, fueled by the constant exposure to others' perfection, makes us believe that something is always missing in us, that we aren't living enough, enjoying enough, being enough. The psychological effect of this dynamic is devastating. Measuring personal worth through the lens of social media disconnects us from our own journey, overshadowing our achievements and moments of happiness with the shine of the edited lives we consume daily. The feeling of inadequacy intensifies, leading to a constant state of comparison and dissatisfaction. Gradually, authenticity dissolves, and the pursuit of being like the others becomes a shadow that haunts both the mind and the heart. The ego, that part of us that craves recognition, is intensely fed on social media. Every like, comment, or new follower triggers an almost Pavlovian response in our brain. It's like a reward cycle, an instant dopamine injection that makes us feel, however briefly, accepted and validated. The ego, by its very nature, is insatiable. The more attention it receives, the more it desires. Thus, the dynamics of social media perfectly align with this mechanism, offering a stage where validation is quantifiable and seemingly infinite. In this scenario, the creation of a digital identity emerges as a powerful tool to feed the ego. Gradually, we start to construct a version of ourselves that doesn't necessarily reflect who we are, but what we believe others expect to see. We create a persona carefully shaped for public consumption, an edited version of our essence. We post photos during moments of joy and success, filter our opinions to please or provoke reactions, and curate our online presence with the intent of maximizing the attention we receive. However, this process of feeding the ego reinforces a great illusion, that our identity and worth depend on external validation. What we often forget is that the ego, despite its insistent voice, is not our true self. It is a construct, a mask, that feeds on others' approval and weakens in the face of rejection. By relying on likes and comments to reinforce our digital identity, we move further away from our authenticity. And this distance creates a void, a subtle but growing sense that something is missing. The ego, though nourished, never feels fully satisfied, and the cycle of seeking approval continues uninterrupted. This cycle, driven by the nature of social media, deepens our disconnection from the inner self. The false identity we create to please the digital audience distances us from our true essence, and the validation we receive, no matter how abundant, never fills the void left by the lack of genuine self-knowledge and self-worth. The constant search for validation on social media leaves deep marks on the human psyche. Anxiety, that latent feeling that we are always falling short or on the verge of something slipping away, becomes a constant presence. When we rely on digital interaction to measure our worth, we start to feel like we are competing for fleeting approval. The absence of likes on a post, the lack of immediate responses, or even the momentary invisibility amid the flood of content creates a corrosive anxiety. The fear of not being seen or relevant in the digital world directly impacts our sense of identity. This cycle of dissatisfaction is worsened by the volatile nature of social media. A successful post may bring temporary euphoria, but the speed with which it disappears in the continuous flow of information creates a need to constantly seek the next peak of validation. The lack of sufficient positive feedback or even the simple absence of interaction awakens feelings of inadequacy, that we are not interesting or valuable enough. This feeling of digital abandonment can slowly lead to frustration and, in more severe cases, depression. In the long term, the psychological impact of depending on digital approval to reinforce a sense of self-worth distances us from a healthy relationship with ourselves. True self-esteem, which should come from within, becomes dependent on external, unstable, and unpredictable factors. With this, we become hostages to the opinions and reactions of others, forgetting that genuine worth cannot be measured in numbers or superficial interactions. The illusion that external validation will bring satisfaction keeps us trapped in an endless race, where the finish line, in fact, never arrives. This constant search prevents us from developing a true sense of self-worth, which can only emerge from a deep and internal acceptance of who we really are, without the need for external approval. We live in an era marked by a false sense of connection. Social media promises to shorten distances, unite people, and strengthen bonds. However, the depth of these connections is often illusory. Digital contact, despite being immediate, tends to be superficial. Quick messages are exchanged, instant interactions occur, but the true encounter, one that goes beyond the screens, is missing. The human touch, direct eye contact, physical presence, all elements that weave deep and authentic relationships, are replaced by likes and comments. And thus, in the vastness of the online world, a paradox arises: the more connected we feel, the lonelier we become. Social media communication, although frequent, is fragmented and often based on idealized representations of ourselves. The paradox of loneliness in a connected world is heightened by the superficiality of these interactions. We may have hundreds of friends online, but how many truly know our pain, doubts, and dreams? How many are tangibly present when we most need support? Social media creates a false sense of security that we are always surrounded by people, but often this presence is empty, without substance. Loneliness, therefore, is not the absence of people, but the absence of genuine connection. When comparing digital interactions with in-person ones, the difference in depth becomes clear. In a face-to-face conversation, there are nuances that cannot be captured through typed words. The tone of voice, the sparkle in the eye, the energy of the moment, all contribute to a much richer relational experience. In the digital sphere, We lose these subtleties, and communication becomes an exchange of data, devoid of human warmth. While social media is convenient, it distances us from the interactions that truly nourish us, those that involve vulnerability, presence, and intimacy. To break free from the invisible prison of external validation, a return to authenticity is necessary. This path, however, is not simple, as it requires the courage to confront the ego and let go of the incessant need for approval. The journey of rediscovering personal value begins with understanding that our worth cannot be defined by digital metrics, by numbers that fluctuate and disappear. True self-worth is born from a deep acceptance of who we are, with all our imperfections, vulnerabilities, and strengths. The first step on this journey is detaching from the idea that external recognition is essential for happiness. Practices like digital detox can be a powerful way to reconnect with oneself. By stepping away, even temporarily, from social media, we have the opportunity to silence the external noise and listen to our inner voices. In this space of silence, we can begin to differentiate what is truly important to us from what merely feeds our ego. The absence of constant notifications frees us from anxiety and allows us to observe how much we depend on digital interactions to feel like we belong. Conscious sharing is another practice that can reconnect us with authenticity. Instead of impulsively posting, seeking immediate reactions, we can reflect on our intentions. What do we want to express? What is the purpose of our communication? This kind of conscious presence on social media, instead of disconnecting us from reality, puts us in control of our own narrative, making it more honest and aligned with who we really are. By cultivating these practices, we begin to build a sense of self-worth that comes from within. And with that, emotional freedom arises that transcends the need for approval. It is in this state of authenticity that we find peace, as we are no longer subject to the judgment and expectations of others. We begin to see ourselves more clearly, realizing that our essence is enough, that our presence in the world is valuable without the need for constant validation. That is true power, the ability to recognize and fully accept oneself, regardless of what the external world reflects. In-person interactions, by their very nature, demand more from us. They challenge us to be vulnerable, to present ourselves without filters, and to connect with the person before us in an honest way. By exchanging the digital environment for face-to-face encounters, we create space for richer communication, where tone of voice, eye contact, and silence become part of the conversation. These moments of total presence are opportunities to truly know the other, with all their complexities and subtleties, something social media cannot capture. Vulnerable communication, in particular, is a powerful tool for strengthening bonds. When we allow ourselves to be seen as we truly are, without the masks the ego builds in the digital environment, we create space for deeper and more meaningful relationships. Instead of curating our words and behaviors to please or impress, we can simply show up as we are, with our insecurities and truths. This openness generates authentic connection because the other person also feels invited to do the same. It is in this fertile ground that true relationships flourish. Balancing online and offline life is another fundamental step. It's not about completely abandoning social media, but about using it consciously and in moderation, recognizing its limitations. Prioritizing real human contact and quality time with those around us is a way to anchor our lives in relationships that truly matter. Participating in shared moments without the distraction of screens allows us to feel life in its fullness, reinforcing the bonds that bring meaning and purpose to our existence. This movement toward more authentic connections not only strengthens our relationships but also fortifies us internally. When we surround ourselves with people with whom we can be our true selves, we find emotional support that nurtures our sense of worth and belonging. These real bonds offer us what the digital world can never provide, a sense of being deeply seen, understood, and accepted for who we truly are. True fulfillment, the kind that brings peace and a lasting sense of worth, cannot be found outside of us, much less in numbers or digital interactions. The essence of self-worth is cultivated internally, in the silence that comes from a deep acceptance of who we are, without needing others' approval. Reevaluating the search for validation is an invitation to reconnect with our authenticity, to break the chains the ego imposes, and to find emotional freedom. It's an invitation to slow down, to step back, even if only for a moment, from the distractions of social media and turn our attention to what really matters, our deeper connections and the building of a sense of value based on self-love. We are enough as we are, and true freedom comes when we stop seeking validation from outside and start fully accepting ourselves. The path to self-knowledge and meaningful relationships is found in simplicity, presence, and, above all, authenticity. Now, it's up to each of us to reflect. What is our true worth, and where are we placing our energy? By reevaluating the role of social media in our lives, we can find the courage to reconnect with our essence and with those who truly surround us. After all, the most important connection we can cultivate is the one with our own self.